All right, it's a couple of minutes after 10 a.m. and we'll get started here. Just like any good concert, we give everyone a couple of extra minutes to get seated at the top of the performance. My name is Bobby Pape. I am the Director of Development and Marketing for the Albany Symphony, and today I have the great honor of helping moderate a conversation with a couple of people who we're thrilled to have back with us again, partners in various capacities who we've collaborated with on multiple occasions. First, our sponsor and presenting partner for this, the latest installment of our This Ability Roundtable series, Feel the Beat panel discussion, the CEO and president of NYSID, New York State Industries for the Disabled, Maureen O'Brien. Maureen and her team work to advance employment and other opportunities for individuals with disabilities. NYSID is a private nonprofit that works with an array of partners and state agencies and other groups to match individuals with disabilities with employers and to create opportunities for their organizations to do fulfillment projects across the state. Maureen, thank you for being such a generous collaborator, both financially and with your time and your investment in our mission. Maureen, before we get started here, perhaps you could tell folks a little bit more about NYSID.
Sure, I'm happy to, Bobby, and thank you so much for having us here. We love our relationship with the Symphony, and we are particularly so honored and proud to be part of this event with Dame Evelyn Glennie. When we partner and can bring attention to individuals of all abilities and what they can do and how they can do it successfully, we raise everybody up. A paycheck, we work with state agencies, with agencies all over the state to ensure that individuals with disabilities get to work. Right now in New York State, an individual with a disability is unemployed at the rate of 67%. It is a staggering number, and that is statewide. And we're working hard to change that. We're very excited about the new administration that's in place here in Albany. They have put a focus on what it is that we're trying to achieve, and we look forward to using technology and everything at our fingertips to make this a more viable employment world for individuals with disabilities. We're delighted here to be a sponsor and truly honored to be sharing a conversation with Evelyn this morning. Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Maureen. We'll have more questions for you about that soon, because I think the more I've explored the overlaps in the work you do and the work that we do and that Evelyn does, it really is something there. And I don't know that she needs much of an introduction, but I'll give one anyway because she deserves it. Simply put, Scottish solo percussionist Dame Evelyn Glennie is a pioneering superstar, a double Grammy Award winner, including one with us here at the Albany Symphony, and celebrated the world over. Evelyn is not only the greatest living percussion soloist of our day, she is the talent and force that has defined solo percussion as a full-time career. Also like us here in Albany, Evelyn is a cross-genre creator and an ardent supporter of the music of today. She has commissioned more than 200 works, and this weekend joins us for the American premiere of a new concerto by Cameron Ince. Beyond the stage, Evelyn is a sought-after educator, facilitator, and charitable force for good. Profoundly deaf from a young age, Evelyn harnesses her success and innovative approach to listening and making music to further her mission of teaching the world to listen, including through her film Touch the Sound and her incredible TED Talk, How to Truly Listen, which has been viewed over 6 million times on the TED Talk website, and I believe over 2 million more on YouTube, and at least 3 or 4 of those is me. Evelyn, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy morning and rehearsal schedule to be with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. It's a really important conversation, I believe, that we can all be participating in. So thank you very much for this.
Well, we're extremely honored. And Evelyn, we'll open up for questions a little bit later. But first, I want to just go straight to the big question, the question that you've spent so much of your career answering. And for folks who may be a little less familiar with your TED Talk or your previous work, can you tell us a little bit about how to truly listen and just that core of the message that you present beyond your performance on stage?
Absolutely. I think really the whole idea of listening started from a very early age in my particular case. I'm a farmer's daughter. I was brought up on a farm. And so, of course, listening in that type of environment is very profound, even although you're not aware of that when you are a child. But you're listening to the seasons, you're listening to machinery, you're listening to livestock. And a lot of the aspects in farm life, you can't force. You have to allow nature to take its course and so on. So, you know, you understand about patience very early on, and listening really is about patience. It's not about sound. Listening is about presence. So you can have a group of people not saying a single word, but actually it's the presence of the connection that's so important. And, you know, I'm in a funny kind of business because, of course, I come to a place and I may be performing in a hall that I've never visited before. I may be connecting with a group of musicians whom I've never met before. We might all be playing a brand new piece of music that none of us have performed before, working with a conductor whom you've never worked with before. So all of these elements or ingredients have to come together, and you know, you have X amount of time to put a piece of music together for our paying customers to experience. So now this is listening at a very profound level. So although we may have all prepared our individual parts and we work with the full score, ultimately it's not really about that then becomes important. It's about the sheer chemistry and the kind of validation of everybody's presence that really brings this all together and makes the difference between what we provide then to our customers, which is basically our audience. And they can feel whether something is genuine, and they can feel whether something is really gelling, and they can feel that teamwork. And so really, you know, I think my whole life has been I suppose trying to join the dots, as it were, and validating every point, you know, every dot, because everything is important, you know, everything is important, everybody is important, and everyone has a story to tell. And, you know, that story has a place in society, it really does. And it's just, you know, as a musician, you know, I can receive a score and I can decide, do I like this piece or don't I like that piece? Now that's a really dangerous position to put yourself in. And just as we make assumptions of people, oh, you know, you immediately think X, Y, and Z of someone and you've just met them for a few seconds. But when you have a piece of music, you know, you have to give that time, not only practice time, but performance time as well. So you can't judge something just on the first date. And so really having the score for the first time, it's just like having a first date. You don't know the full story of that piece of music. So really everything needs time. It just does. So, and all of that is a form of listening.
Evelyn, speaking of those first judgments that we need to be so careful to avoid, and giving things time to evolve and grow and growing our understanding, maybe you could share for those who are less familiar, your background having come up through the Royal Academy of Music and the way you've opened doors through your pioneering and story on the academic side of music in the UK.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I auditioned for the Royal Academy of Music and the Royal College of Music in London at the age of 16, which is quite young, actually. And so I definitely wasn't expecting to be accepted to either place. But it was just building the experience of auditioning for something and just getting an inkling of where I was standard-wise and that type of thing, and just building on the experience. However, I felt that the audition was positive, and I felt I had, you know, given everything I possibly could. And however, in those days, and it's important to really address historically where we were at that time. But in those days, which was the early 80s, most of the students who went to places like the Academy and College and music specialist places usually either went into orchestras or taught. And that was just the expectation. And so already I had in my mind that I would only go in for music if I could really specialize in solo percussion. Obviously, I knew I'd have to do many other things, but basically that was my vision. And so when the Academy said, well, yes, your audition was very good. However, we cannot accept you because no professional orchestra will employ a hearing impaired musician. Now, that really was like I simply couldn't comprehend this, partly because, well, first of all, if the audition was of the standard to get in, you must be accepted, you know, that is that. So, and also I didn't want to be a member of an orchestra. So already they were forming a kind of expectation. And so, of course, you know, the fact that I wanted to be a solo percussionist was almost like a double whammy for them. And so it was really one man on the panel who said, actually, hold on a second. We need to be really careful here. We can't start judging and expecting and sort of trying to lay out someone's career path without really listening to them. You know, not just listening to the audition, but listening to the person. And so he said, really, we need to give this person a second audition because, of course, at that point, they had said, no, we won't let you in. And of course, I was saying, well, you know, you basically have to let me in. You cannot start judging people if they have no arms, no legs, if they're sight impaired, hearing impaired, or whatever the case may be. You can't make that judgment. So they afforded me this second edition, which had nothing to do with percussion playing. So this was all at the piano keyboard to do with sight reading, score reading, figured bass, transposition, looking at a full score, deciding who might have composed that and why. It was everything to do with general musicianship, which of course that's what I wanted to be, a musician, you know. So basically after that edition, they said, okay, right, you can start in September. And this changed the way that the auditions happened, in that really, you know, it changed the way in what the institutions offered, first of all, because the very fact that someone said, well, I don't want to be in an orchestra, I want to be a solo percussionist, or I want to be this, or I want to be that, you know, and an institution is there to support. There's a responsibility of the institution, and there's also the responsibility of the individual, so in this case, the student. And so we all have to work together. So, you know, a student can't just sit back and say, oh, well, give, you know, from an institution. And equally, an institution can't say, you must do this, you must do that, and we expect you to do this and that. It's a dialogue. And so there has to be that responsibility in the same way that this happens in the workplace. You know, it really is. Now, I employ a very small team of people, and, you know, it's kind of a flat structure that we have. So I don't see myself as a boss or anything like that. I'm not there to dictate. I'm there to liaise with people who can do a lot of things a lot better than I can do. However, I would not expect them to stand up on stage with the Albany Symphony and do what I do. So this is what I do. But all of the discussions is completely about listening and supporting and seeing what's needed. And you know, it's just this wonderful pot of ideas and respect and validation and openness and all of that, to the extent that if someone feels they want to talk about something because they feel uncomfortable about something, they have that platform to do so. So, and that's what a good, I think, you know, environment is all about, is that it just absolutely, you know, people can zoom out of situations, they can zoom into situations, they can, you know, be completely respected and validated in what they do, so that they can grow, not just in the four walls of the workplace, but in every aspect of their life.
You know, I think there's probably about a dozen things you just said that I could use to transition to the work that Maureen is doing here in New York State. But as much as anything, I think the overarching message that this is a conversation about dialogue, but not one of compromise, is something that has struck me both about your story, Evelyn, and in the work that Maureen is doing. In Maureen's case, she's not asking partner vendors and employers to accept anything less than an exacting standard from the work that employees do. She's simply asking them to consider who can do that work and to not be so closed or limited in who those folks can be. Maureen, I've heard countless stories from folks who, through your facilitation, have been placed in jobs. I wonder if you can tell a little bit more about that and the fulfillment and the opportunities that that creates.
Sure. And I think Evelyn's whole story about her audition and that process, an interview for a job is an audition. And it's very, very similar. Her experience is so similar to the experiences that many of the people that we work with go through. And I think we need to change the dialogue and do things similar to what Evelyn talks about in her TED Talk and listen better. When an individual who is neurodiverse or neurodivergent goes to an interview, they are not going to make eye contact, probably. They might not be comfortable in shaking your hand. They may not be able to sit still with their hands on their lap behind a desk, but they sure as heck can do the job based on what the job description is and based on what it is that you're trying to hire for. So one of the things we really try to do is change that dialogue and try to get an employer to listen differently to what this individual's capabilities are, because they certainly can do what's described in the job. Oftentimes what happens in our world is once someone who has had a barrier to employment gets hired, they change the whole atmosphere of a workplace. People who have had barriers to employment work harder. They stay longer in a job. They love having coworkers and making conversation and being part of a community at work. And so, I say to employers all the time, take a chance here, because you don't know how this person is going to change the culture in your own workplace. And again, I'll go back to why it is so important for NYSID to participate with the Symphony and to participate in conversations like this, because the story Evelyn told of her interview process or her audition process was not far after in the United States, up until 1978, we still institutionalized individuals with disabilities rather than having them live in the community and figure out what great skills they had and what role they could play in the workforce. All of this was happening at the same time. I think today, we would be wildly surprised if someone went to an audition or an interview and it was said, well, we don't know how to do this. We can't possibly do this. We can't hire this person, or this person can't be part of our orchestra because of the disability they have. I often think disability is the wrong word because it has a negative connotation. I think where some people have different abilities, it gives them other things that they do better. And I think when Evelyn talks about listening and how you do that better as someone who is hearing impaired, it shows that you have these other strengths that come to the forefront because of something that the general public perceives as a disability. I don't think it necessarily is. There's a lot of work to be done. We talk in the United States all the time about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is often race-based or sexual orientation-based. It has to include individuals with disabilities. That discussion has to be broader and more inclusive.
Maureen, while I have you on the main screen here, I want to talk a little bit about something that I've drawn from Evelyn's work that I think is also applicable to yours. And I'll go back to the stories I've heard of folks who've been successfully placed into workplaces and what you said about how individuals who've been hired through NYSED's efforts not only execute a job, but also find fulfillment for themselves and create enrichment in their workplaces. And to me, there's a real strong overlap there between a technician and a musician, as Evelyn puts it in her talk. It's one thing to execute a job and to just do it the way it's written and to be punched in and punched out. But it's another to foster dignity and community. And similarly, I think for a musician, when you talk about internalization and interpretation of music to let it flow and embody what you're doing, it becomes a core part of your identity. Maybe Maureen, if you would share a little bit about that and how you've seen that blossom in folks you've placed. And then Evelyn, after that, I'll ask you to, I know you're not in a position to demonstrate musically today, despite being on the beautiful Troy Savings Bank Music Hall stage, but perhaps after Maureen, you can speak to that a little bit. After all that, we'll take some questions from the audience. The easiest way to do that is to put them in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that there along with my colleague, Jay.
So Bobby, I'll tell a brief story, and it involves music. So we have individuals who are neurodiverse who work for us here in our office at NYSED. We had our holiday party just before Christmas. And at the holiday party, all the music started after everybody had eaten their meal. And you could see the neurotypical folks who work for NYSED really wanted to get on the dance floor. They were kind of itching to do it. And they thought, is it appropriate? I'm not really sure if I should go on the dance floor. And our neurodiverse individual who works for us, who, you know, anyone who's neurodiverse, I have a child who's neurodiverse, what they always tell you is they lack the term they use is executive functioning skills, which I think is hysterical because they're just super honest people, is the way that I look at most people who are neurodiverse. They tell you like it is. So the gentleman who was neurodiverse was the first one on the dance floor. He got out there. It was fantastic. He used every limb, really enjoyed himself. And then the rest of the group joined because they thought, okay, now it's okay to go out to the dance floor. He was an integral part of our office, an integral part and co-worker with everybody else who was there. There was no difference between anybody who was out enjoying themselves and being part of the community that we have as a work group and as co-workers. And I think, you know, people who go to work who have had, and I've used this term before, a barrier to employment, a paycheck provides economic security. It allows people to contribute to a household. It allows you to live on your own and have independent life experiences. And that shouldn't be a thing that is only for people who are not disabled. It is something that everyone should have the ability to do. And by working through this equity, diversity, and inclusion formula to include individuals with disabilities, I think it is a human right that we spread across the spectrum. But it changes everybody you work with. We have some folks here who have completely changed the dynamics of how our office operates.
That's incredible. Evelyn, tell us a little bit about how that changes your experience on stage with your colleagues and as a solo percussionist, even in the execution of performance.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think it's interesting because, of course, people in a way can access music in so many different ways nowadays. You know, when I was growing up, you basically received a piece of music and then you worked out what to do, and you might have worked with a teacher or something, but basically you had to have faith in your own ideas and decision making, because there were no recordings, there wasn't YouTube, and there wasn't email whereby you could communicate with people. So you had to write a letter to the composer if you had a question, and then you may or may not have received a reply. So again, that goes back to patience and just having the responsibility again of you know, working out what you feel you want to do. And I do use that word quite a lot. I think I've noticed that this morning, feel, but you know, it's such an important word, because it's something that's so internal, and when you feel something, people can actually connect with that. And but yes, I just think that, you know, you have an orchestra of maybe 100 people or 80 people or however many people, and we've all got ideas towards that piece of music. And it's important that there's an avenue for someone to say, oh, you know, I think it could be like this, or oh, how about maybe we could try it like that, or oh, I'm really struggling with this, or how about this, and just being able to sort of very clearly and concisely say what they want to say, because of course also in this situation time is money and we don't always have a lot of time, but that can be really handled well if people know that there's that avenue to be able to speak and get their message over. Just going back to, if I may, and if there's time, about the employment situation, because what we're inclined to do in our own little setup at home is that when we feel that, oh crumbs, we would really like to have that person on board, we always have a trial period. I hate that word trial, but you know what I mean. We always have a period of no less than 1 month for that person to come in, start work, and we all again get a feel for each other, and we see how people relate to each other as well, because a lot of this is about chemistry. So that has nothing to do with disability. It's chemistry between people. So you know, in the same way that you can have the 5 of the greatest violinists in the world all come together and perform, but that doesn't actually mean it's going to be the greatest performance ever, because it might just be the chemistry doesn't work. So you might have 5 individuals that maybe not gelling, or it may well gel. So it's you know, that is really, really important. So that is something that we do and we encourage, and it just gives time again to see, you know, what sort of maneuvering and adjusting and whatever it might be needs to be put in place. So that's definitely something we do. But that's no different from learning a piece of music or giving the first performance of a piece of music. You know, you suddenly don't become Michael Schumacher and you know, be able to drive, you know, racing cars. It just means, okay, you might have passed your test, but now, you know, you've got to get on the motorway or the highway, and that takes several performances before you feel, yep, I know exactly, you know, where I want to be and what I'm doing and so on. So
Evelyn, I think that's a great transition into a couple of questions that have come in through the chat. Some are being shown to everyone. Some of you are messaging us directly, which is great. I'll push these 2 together because I think they can be answered together. Lou writes, from your discussion, it sounds like there is some empathy involved. And he's asking, how can a symphony facilitate concerts in such a way that all individuals can enjoy them? And David writes a question for both Dame Evelyn and Maureen. Another letter that has been added to DEI is the letter B for belonging. How can we help people with disabilities feel like they belong with everyone else, despite the fact that they may process social cues differently than everyone else? And I'll add, perhaps will hear a performance differently than everyone else. And Evelyn, if you'd like to say something on that, and then we'll pull Maureen back in on that too.
yes, absolutely. I mean, the doors of any performance space, you know, is there for all to enter, and that performance starts as soon as an individual enters a space, not when the musicians start playing that first note. That performance really does start as soon as they walk into the building. So the facilities available, how they are greeted, you know, how they are communicated with, etc., etc. The facilities available and how they can access those. That's when the performance starts. And then when they walk into the space of the performance, really, again, you know, it's this feeling where the musicians are giving, and you know, we are in a way servants. We want to give what we do to our audience. You know, we want to give them an experience. Now, that experience isn't all about, well, we want you to like this piece of music and we want you to say that was really good. That isn't what we're really saying. We want, because not all people will like the music, you know, but they will feel if that presentation and the giving of that product is absolutely the best that it possibly can be, and if that is communicated well to the audience. So there's always discussion and debate about, you know, whether people like the music, don't like the music, why, and whatever. That's just taste. So that has nothing to do with a disability or anything like that. And then, of course, the performance ends once they walk out the door of the performance space, and how then they proceed after that. So really, I think it's just the whole package of including the space that they're in. I don't think we can just sort of box up the performance as to what happens on the stage. There's a lot more to the experience, and that's where the teamwork and the expertise, again, all of the people, you know, out at the front in the reception area, etc., they're absolutely as important as everybody else, you know, that is part of that performance.
Thank you, Evelyn. And I think from a global perspective, Maureen, I would love your input here. When we talk about empathy and belonging, I don't think that message only applies to individuals with disabilities. You know, we work with consultants on the technical side of how we can make sure that we're achieving maximum access in various ways. But even in the perspective of audience development, sales, and just being open to community, folks' impressions of their experience with the Symphony or any other organization can be warmer, and we can encourage people to come back and participate more by making them feel more at home and a part of what we're doing, instead of as outsiders experiencing for the first time. You spent a lot of time, Maureen, helping foster that for employers and partners. Could you tell us a little bit more about sort of that atmospheric experience that you help create?
Sure. There's a couple of things I would say about that. The first is you have to look at the whole person. And I often use this with people that we work with. Someone's disability is just one aspect of who they are. There is a whole person there with all these other thoughts and ideas and skills and things that they do. And perhaps that one aspect of the disability helps that person see the world a little bit differently. I do think there's empathy involved, and you know, being a mom, there are two terms I use with my kids all the time: kindness matters, and there's no traffic on the high road. And I think, you know, we focus so much in the corporate workplace on training people and making sure they know how to do this, and making sure they've taken a certification to cover various trainings. I often say to the staff here when we have to sit down for a mandatory training in New York State that if we all just treated each other with kindness, we would never have to take these trainings. And if we came to work every day and looked at the work environment as an extension of who we are as people, it would be a much calmer and a beautifully productive place. So I do think there's empathy involved, but I do think it's also in looking at the whole person and realizing what their skills are and how those skills can translate to the job that you have.
Great. Maureen, I have a technical question for you from someone who's watching along right now, and then I have got a couple questions for Evelyn. While I have you centered, Maureen, we've got a person who asks, and I'll clarify this question a little as I read it: how many individuals with disabilities are employed through NYSID, and how does this compare to employment numbers pre-pandemic? How many jobs does NYSID hope to create going forward? And I'll go ahead and put the note in there that in addition, greatly beyond your hiring capacity, really you generate opportunities for partner organizations and employers. So maybe you can speak to it through that lens. Yep.
So through NYSID contracts, last year we created in the range of 5,000 jobs. We hope to grow that number post-pandemic. One of the things that happened during the pandemic that hasn't happened for us before, there was a group of people who could not go to work because of underlying health issue. So someone who had cerebral palsy or MS or something where if they got COVID, it would be a significant recovery issue for them. They were forced to stay home. We had other workers who were essential workers and who had never had that title before in their life. So we do a lot of maintenance, porter, janitorial work around the state. And a lot of our folks all of the sudden had to go to work and were extremely important and took a great deal of pride in the work that they did during the pandemic. Our hope is that with technology, there are other jobs and other occupations that we can focus on to bring people into, and we plan to do that. That's part of our strategic plan for the coming year. So our goal is to break 6,000 a year in new jobs. About 9.5% of the New York State population has a disability, and there's a lot of people that we have the ability to work with through the program.
Excellent. I have a couple of questions here for Evelyn, and we'll start with a couple of hard-hitting questions from a class of fourth graders in Stacy Radner's class at Castleton Elementary School. They are all watching right now, and they say that they have read Evelyn's picture book biography, Listen, and love it. But they have some questions. Evelyn, they'd like to know, what was the process in making the book, and do you love the book as much as they do?
Oh, well, how lovely that you're being able to join us. So thank you for that. Yes, the Listen book is it's a lovely book. And, you know, funnily enough, I really had a wonderful time working with the author of the book and also the illustrator. And the illustrator actually came along to a concert I gave in Germany because that's where she lives. And so she basically watched how I moved as I played and tried to get some of the actions and the size of the instruments and really get a feel for what was happening. And I think this helped to inform her as regards to the illustrations that she made. And she's done a wonderful, wonderful job. And then, of course, for the writer of the book, it's such a skill to try to condense something, you know, in just a few words. And it really is an art form. So we just worked together on the accuracy and making sure that everything flowed. But truly, I mean, those people are professionals in what they do. So for me, it was just a little tweak here and there, or where we just had a discussion on what we felt about certain things. But I really, you know, just left them to it, and so they were able to put this lovely product together.
That's great. Thank you to all of you at Castleton Elementary in Ms. Radner's class. And Stacy, if you would, I think my colleague Jay, our Director of Education and Community Engagement, is going to follow up with you. You might check your messages if she hasn't messaged you yet through Zoom, or she may email you. We want to make sure that we get you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Evelyn and what we do at the Albany Symphony. Evelyn, I have a question from Jeff, who I think asks one of the big questions that a lot of folks probably have for you all the time. He writes, what is your level of hearing and how does this impact your ability to work with the orchestra? I might revise that slightly to say conventional hearing as most of us usually think of it. And obviously it hasn't negatively impacted your ability to work with an orchestra, but maybe you could just walk through a little bit of how you feel sound differently when you're on stage with players, just like the one behind you here.
Yes, well, each stage and each acoustic of the room that I'm in varies considerably, and it's the acoustics of a space that is really, really important. So whether something is very reverberant or wet or something dry, and all of that plays an impact on how you produce your sound, but also the fact that, you know, most of the time I'm playing on other people's equipment, so none of the instruments that you see here belong to me, and so that in itself is a moment of really spending time with the instruments and how they speak and your relationship with that instrument. So you can't just plant what you have practiced in your own four walls at home and just sort of go plunk there on the stage here in this wonderful space. You have to almost start all over again and have that conversation with the acoustics. So that's really, really important. But also, although the stage here is very, very narrow, I normally try to turn my instruments to more or less a 90-degree angle to the audience. Now, I'm not able to do that entirely with the marimba, but it is slanted a bit. But with all of the other instruments, they're either facing directly the orchestra towards the conductor, or else at a 90-degree angle. And the reason for this is that I can see the conductor can see me. So it's again a two-way conversation that we have. So the conductor really needs to see the movement of when I strike something, as opposed to just reacting to when he might hear that sound. So the hearing really starts with the whole gesture of how you're going to produce that sound. And it also means that I can see about 3/4 of the orchestra, and they can see me as well. So that's really, really important. So always I have to see the conductor and a good part of the orchestra. It's not so much, actually, funnily enough, about physically feeling the orchestra. It is important now and again, but the fact is that you've spent a lot of time with the full score. So you learn the piece from the full score, so that the eye can see what the trumpets are doing, what the French horns are doing, what the strings are doing, etc., etc. And you can then decide how your part becomes, part of that piece of music. So you can't learn a piece of music by only learning your part. You have no idea whether you're solo, whether you're accompanying, whether you're giving a musical idea to another part of the orchestra, whether you're receiving a musical idea from them. You have to have that whole story of the music. So can you imagine reading a book and you only have just, the odd word from every single sentence? You wouldn't have any kind of real clue what that story really is about. And it's the same with music. You need the whole score in order to know the story. So that's important. But the eye plays such a big part in what you actually hear, as it were. So if I'm seeing a string player, go like this, then I know that it's going to be fairly, aggressive. It's going to be fairly forward sounding. It's going to be where they're giving the sound to the audience. Whereas if they're playing like this, I may think, they want the audience to come to the sound. So this visual cues are really, really important to have.
Evelyn, in the context of this weekend's concerts, you're joining us to perform a work by Cameron Ince that you've played and has been played once before. It's been a couple of years. And going back to where we started this conversation at the top of the hour, you talked about learning, growing up on a farm, how things need to grow and mature. I'm wondering how this piece has resonated with you since the first performance. And maybe you could give folks your thoughts on what they'll expect to hear and experience when they join us at the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall tomorrow night or Sunday afternoon.
Well, this is a percussion concerto by the Turkish-American composer Cameron Ince. And basically, it's for what we call multi-percussion, and that means we have things like a marimba, a vibraphone, glockenspiel, a multi-drum setup, and a Turkish traditional drum called a davul, and which is played on two skins on either side. And now, when we gave the premiere, this might have been about 4 years ago, and it hasn't been performed since. The composer actually conducted the piece as well, so that was really interesting. And it's always very fascinating when you're working with a composer, but when they're also the conductor, there's all sorts of things that you have to try to digest, and you're trying to work out, well, what does the composer want, and also when they have that interaction with the whole orchestra as the conductor, it's really quite fascinating. So this time we're in a position where we obviously have the Albany Symphony Orchestra's principal conductor, which is David Alan Miller. And so the composer is sitting out in the auditorium, and that has a very different dynamic. And when you have another conductor in place, they can give their perspective on the piece. So a lot of things have really changed from the premiere. And because it hasn't been played since the very first performance, it's not a piece that is absolutely under my skin, it's something that I'm still very much, processing and developing. So, and then part of the challenge in being a percussion player when it is a multi-piece like this, and when the stage is quite small, is that you have to find a way to get through the instruments. So there are some quick changes to be had. And but we're also recording this piece of music, and that's a very different art form. So, people think, well, you just perform, but actually when you have microphones there that are picking the minutest things that a human being can't necessarily pick up, then that's a very different way of performing, and you're very much thinking of tone or less is more and that type of thing. Whereas in a performance, you're giving absolutely everything, including your whole physical being. So, it's an interesting process.
Well, thank you, Evelyn. I'm not sure that I could do a better job of persuading folks to join us this weekend to come hear this piece brought to life on stage. So I'll give the official pitch here. If you don't already have your tickets, Evelyn will be performing with us at 7:30 p.m. Saturday night, and again at 3 p.m. on Sunday at the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. Tickets are at albanysymphony.com. In addition to this piece, and the Inns Concerto, and Cameron is with us, and we'll be discussing the piece with David Alan Miller before each concert. There's a pre-concert talk 1 hour before each performance. The concert also features a work by another living composer, Harriet Steinke, who's also with us to share a bit about her work. That piece is Harriet Lair, and this is its first true public performance. So it's another one where we will all be in the room together to help bring it to life for a large audience. We also have the incredible Sibelius Symphony No. 5. The whole experience should be something unforgettable. And in my years, I've never seen a stage with quite this much percussion on it. In addition to Evelyn's creativity and abilities, we'll also see her dexterity on full display running around the stage. Thank you once more to Maureen O'Brien, President and CEO of NYSID, and her organization for their support of this talk today and of our performances this weekend. For those of you who are less familiar, NYSID has been a partner with us for several years now, and the capacities in which we find our worlds overlapping never cease to amaze me, and I'm so glad that we have this continuing dialogue with you. So Maureen, thank you so much.
Thrilled to be here, Bobby. Thank you.
And Evelyn, we'll let you get back to practicing on that very narrow stage full of very many instruments, but we look forward to your performances tomorrow evening and Sunday. Thank you for coming back to Albany with us once again, for all you do for us, and we'll see you on stage tomorrow night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Special thanks to my colleague, Jay Gale, our Director of Education and Community Engagement, for being on the technical side here of getting everything running. David Alan Miller, who I know is somewhere here in our sea of participants, for helping bring Evelyn back here and putting this wonderful program together for us. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, albanysymphony.com, for all that information. And like I said, tickets are still available, although going pretty quickly. So do join us if you don't have them already. We'll look forward to hearing from you today.